Good morning. It is June, and I thought I would do June. I might do inspirational, my favorite inspirations in film or television. But I want it to be tied to more than just what inspires me. I want to tie it to actual gaming mechanics. So this particular video will be GM talk. Uh, Inspirational. I say favorites because obviously if it's inspirational, it's a favorite film, right? And I've got a boatload. But when it comes to stuff, genre films of particular genre that inspire my imagination as a player or my imagination as a GM or inspire me to think about trying a particular book with a particular setting and a genre. That's obvious with IPs, right? Hey, we're going to buy Alien because it's directly referring to the films or the film, whatever. So those are obvious when we're picking an IP. The Star Trek Adventures game, Conan 2D20, clearly the IP, the inspiration is hard baked into the books. And that's one of the things we don't talk enough about. What makes buying the 2D20 Conan great is, well, the book itself can be inspirational, right? Clearly you wouldn't probably be interested in Conan if you hadn't enjoyed the movies or the books or the comic books or the large format comics or whatever it is that, wherever you get your Conan, your high adventure. So obviously, something like Star Trek Adventures, that IP, that inspiration, hopefully is burned into the book. So as you read the book, as you learn the rules, as you create a character, you're getting inspired to play. You're getting inspired to jump into that Star Trek universe, right? Okay. So, but because I grew up playing non-IP games, right? Star Frontiers, Top Secret, D&D, Boot Hill, they were all genre games, but they weren't particular IPs. And so therefore Boot Hill could be all kinds of, Wild West, but they could be a bank heist or posses pursuing bad guys or a bounty hunter pursuing bad guys. We generally did, if I remember right, we had some gunfights in the street, so we'd have these challenges to see, if we could beat Billy the Kid, or because I think Boot Hill had NPCs in the book that were get Pat Garrett and stuff like that. Okay, but those would inspire ideas. But we were kids, and so we would do something like, you have to ride out to the farmhouse and apprehend Billy the Kid and his gang out there or something. And we only played Boot Hill a handful of times, but I remember really being inspired by the material. Star Frontiers, I think we tried a couple of times in the city map. So again, we didn't, for some reason, the science fiction that inspired us as kids didn't inspire us to play Star Frontiers. And that's sad because I think Star Frontiers probably has a lot to offer. We weren't in the mindset, or we didn't use Star Frontiers a particular way to inspire the science fiction we were interested in. Okay, but let's cut to the chase. Fantasy for me, low magic, gritty, dark. I won't say grim dark, but dark, pseudo historic or pseudo realistic with fantasy elements. I love the idea of it's very much the world you live in with these things that permeate the supernatural. Again, a lot of inspirational films here on this. But today I want to talk about travel, and I'm bringing this up because there's two primary ways that I've enjoyed travel in games as a GM. Mostly running OSRs, white box, Sword and Wizardry, complete Sword and Wizardry white box, Labyrinth Lord. Almost all travel we would do like a map hex crawl in the last 10 years. So almost everything I have run in the last 8-10 years locally has been a map hex crawl. What I was running with Basic Fantasy Online was not, because I didn't use maps. I didn't use a virtual table. So when I ran my Basic Fantasy campaigns, which went about 28 sessions, I think it was every week or every other week, we ran that for almost 28 sessions, 29 sessions. There was a map. There was an overall map world. They understood the certain places they were. They could imagine certain things. So I had a world map, and they knew where the pillars were, and they knew where the bridges were, and they knew what areas the kingdoms were in, etc. But it was a pretty much it was a blank canvas to fill in some of the details as they went along. And I did have an empire, and I did have the hobgoblin, civilization. I did have civilizations that which would butt heads, so to speak. But okay. But more importantly, almost all travel in that was, for the most part, day by day, but it wasn't so much a hex crawl in a traditional sense, right? It was more narrative, day by day, right? Okay, it's about midday. Okay, it's about 2. Okay, you run across this thing. Okay, you're setting camp. Okay, I'll make a couple of wandering monster rolls, whatever. But it was very much a vague. It was not a mechanical hex crawl. Okay. Almost everything I've run locally with OSRs, D20, old D&D, et cetera, have all been straight up hex crawls. Using my own worlds, I use a pawn. They move the pawn on the board by flipping it. Their pawn can move that far in a day, and they just flip it, stand it up, and that is an entire day's worth of travel when they're trying to get to a location on this generalized map of the world, which is not the same as the map I have. So they're heading towards something. That's the rumors of where the thing is. They might be off, right? It may not be exactly there. So it creates mystery. They have vague ideas of what's out there in the world. They don't necessarily know exactly where that is, right? Okay. And that inspires them to go where they want to go, but at the same time, discover what's there or discover what's not there. And then, of course, well, where the hell is the city? And they have to stop travelers or whatever. Where is Gondolin, right? Okay. So I've appreciated travel as a GM in those two ways. Pretty much when I'm running non-maps, non-minis, non-table, non-tabletop simulator, I'm doing a more narrative, generalized passage of time, try to draw the players in with descriptive ideas of what they're passing through and what time it is and what they're seeing, etc. And then of course the hex crawl is much more mechanical, right? Okay. And I know there are I've heard friends, colleagues say they hate travel in games. And I didn't respond to that, but it took me aback. I immediately went, what? Almost all film, literature, travel is a huge part of it. And to hate travel in games is bizarre to me because travel is quite literally what we're doing, right? Whether we are now, unless we're set on ourselves in Camelot and we're doing a political intrigue game where you really don't travel very far. I mean, literally Camelot might be 90 miles removed or maybe even 15 miles removed from an enemy, right? So we're not going real far, right? Dark Age of Man, we've had this where they're in Dredgewater and they haven't gone very far yet in our chronicles outside of Dredgewater, just in the vicinity of a few miles, right? Which is pretty normal, for most folks. They know even today, many people don't venture far from the home they grew up in or far from the place they were born. Some do, of course. Some people are world travelers and they go wherever. In the military, you're obviously a globetrotter. But a lot of people don't go far from where they were born or where they grew up, right? That doesn't mean they don't travel and see things. But I thought about this. To me, travel it's huge. I mean, Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, so much of it is getting from point A to point B. Conan the Barbarian, I mean, he is taken as a slave and hiked into the desert. And then he's brought up as a warrior slave. And then he escapes and he has to run through the desert. I mean, there's a great scene where they're just running for the city, right? They're traveling on foot, running through the desert. And eventually they arrive at the city of thieves, right? And there's all kinds of things you can encounter along the way. The B movie, Barbarian B movie, one of my favorite bad B movie. I got the Blu-ray special edition. I love it. The whole movie starts with him running, right, with that rock song, and the whole credits and everything are Yor in his freaking loincloth, just running. All the opening credits, he's just running. So obviously, it implies he's going from some place looking for some other place. Randomly or going somewhere in general, I don't think so. I think he's just running, trying to find civilization. But to me, this is paramount, right? So inspiration, right? So I want to talk about a particular film that's inspirational to me. This is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers. I think he's for me, he's one of the top 5 directors and filmmakers in film history for me. Again, everything I say is about what I'm interested in. I'm not making declarations that, you should weigh yours. But Peter Weir, and one of the final films, he's only made a couple, I think, since this. Matter of fact, this might have been his final film before he retired, if I remember right. The Way Back, which is based on a true story. The Way Back, let's see here. These are prisoners in a Russian Siberian gulag, and they decide to make a break for it. It's a true story. They go on foot. I think it's a 5,000-mile journey on foot. And this is about their story. And it is a true story about these prisoners escaped a Russian camp and hiked through Russia and China. And it's a brilliant film. And the entire thing is a travel log, and all of the adventures they have along the way, right? Hiding from potential patrols, trying to survive the winter, trying to eat, trying to survive the desert, all the things and the people they encounter. And most importantly, what makes this an interesting, this would be similar to the lifeboat scenario, right? The lifeboat scenario is about the player characters in the boat, and it becomes not about the enemies out there. It becomes about the player characters in a lifeboat trying to survive. They're dependent on each other to survive and to hike and to get where they're going. But at the same time, they can be their own worst enemies, or find that they are, Colin Farrell, I believe is his name. He plays a particularly interesting, I won't say psychopath, but a very dangerous criminal who is very capable. And you suspect through most of the adventure that this man is going to be a problem. And of course, he proves out to be help, but he also proves out to be dangerous. It's a fascinating journey into the souls of people and what they endure to survive, and etc. And here's an example of the world we live in, right? Travel, right? The world we live in, what does it take? And the adventure itself to get from point A to point B. And the reason you're doing it is to get away from a thing, or is to escape the Russians, is escape being a prisoner, escape, or to move from a failing civilization in which volcanoes just erupted and has turned Earth into ash, and you're trying to get through a wasteland. I mean, and all of the adventures and the things you'll see along the way. So it seems to me crazy to not enjoy travel in our role-playing games, but in particular fantasy role-playing games. Obviously, if you're doing a sci-fi, you're going to travel. You're going to travel by ship to planets. You're going to take jumps through solar systems. That can be fascinating. A lot of these games have great ways to make the roll to see if you make the right jump, if things make mistakes along the way. And there's complete mechanisms tied to travel. The One Ring and Adventures in the Middle Earth for D&D 5th edition, and those have the journey rules, which literally mechanize your group and how they're going to go from point A to point B, and everything they have to do. It's mechanized, and it becomes fun because it's part of it's gamey. I mean, there's game elements to it, but that creates this adventure that you're going to run into something you need to investigate, or you're going to run into enemies, or you're going to run whatever. And it just seems to me, if we're not going very far, right, we're missing one of the big tropes of fantasy, one of the big tropes of adventure, right? So also, most of this I will discuss in terms of fantasy, because that is my preferred genre, and I will be discussing this mostly in relationship to what we do in OSRs, Old D20, Simba Room, etc. Right? So I'm not talking all role-playing games. I mean, Call of Cthulhu, right? You're going to spend it maybe in a small town in Maine or Massachusetts on the coast in 1927 investigating Weir. Are you going to be removed onto some location in the fog? So travel is not the big part of, say, Call of Cthulhu, right? Could be, though. I mean, you could have a brilliant Call of Cthulhu on a train going from point A to point B, right, across the across territory. And the train, they're dealing with all the situations on the train while the train actually is changing locations, etc. But they're kind of confined to the train. So, but travel becomes part of it, and hopefully you're pointing it out through the windows of the train. You're pointing it out when they make a whistle stop. You're pointing it out when you're looking for a murder on the train, and well, we're stopping in 10 minutes. We got to make sure that murderer doesn't get away from us at this, right? Whatever the course may be. But so June 6th or June 5th, my first talk is a Peter Weir film, The Way Back. Peter Weir, of course, I think he's got many films that are, I think, masterpieces. For me, I think Master and Commander with Russell Crowe is probably his single greatest achievement was Master and Commander. I think is a phenomenal film based on the novels. If you haven't seen it, and of all the things I'd recommend, Peter Weir's famous for surreal, very surreal films. Master and Commander is less surreal than everything else. This is less surreal, a little more real, but a lot of his early films had a lot of surreal fantasy to them. You weren't certain what was real and what wasn't real, etc. And they were amazing. But Master and Commander, less surreal and more telling of the novel, right? A telling of the tale, an adaptation, right, of a brilliant novels. So anyway, travel. how can you not like it? So how do we make it good? Well, if it's mechanized and there's rules and the players understand the rules and they know I'm rolling for Wandering Monster, they know I'm rolling for Lost or whatever, or they're rolling, depends on the game. You know, Simbaroom in their hex crawl rules ask them to roll everything and you prompt them. That can become very formulaic and very mechanical. And I have run it that way in a couple of our online sessions, and unfortunately, I probably make it too mechanical. Once I would get really comfortable with it, I would probably couch it in much more. You know, this is something David does brilliantly. David is really good at avoiding references to the actual mechanics we're going to use, and avoid references so you don't. He's just really good at putting us there, although he's using the mechanisms without calling for the mechanisms. And it's something I appreciate and I would like to do better as a GM. So I prefer Simbaroom, for instance, core rulebook, which infers the interludes / scenes, right? So I can literally give them an interlude of how they've traveled for 5 days and they've arrived at blah, 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 and here it is. Or we can talk about the travel intermittently, and scenes can be introduced as they come to crossroads, as they meet travelers, as they see something in the distance. And then we just cut to scenes, you know, and give them an opportunity to respond to these things that they're witnessing on their journeys, right? And they can become the play to find out moments. Interlude, telling the tale, and then on your third day, you witness in the not far, it looks about a quarter of a mile. You can see it looks like a wagon train, and they're not moving, and there's smoke. You know, to the northeast, and they can investigate or they can keep on trucking, right? I can't think of a Western film that is an inspiration to me, or a fantasy film or literature that is an inspiration to me that doesn't involve travel, that doesn't involve pursuit or being pursued. For me, one of my big inspirations in television is Gunsmoke. What I love about Gunsmoke is very often the trouble comes to town. I ran a Dragon Age early on Skype with Labyrinth Lord. I ran a Dragon Age session where they didn't leave Redcliffe much, and I basically said, "This is Gunsmoke. Let's bring all the things to Redcliffe." They would go out and do some adventure, but the reality was they were hanging around Redcliffe so much. All the adventure kind of occurred in the town of Redcliffe, which was fantastic. And I loved it. I don't know how much they appreciated it, especially when I said, you know, guys, we're basically doing Gunsmoke here, right? I don't think they appreciated, you know, me breaking it down in that kind of truth, right? This is Gunsmoke. You guys are hanging out in Redcliffe. You're not going very far. And all of the stuff comes to Redcliffe. And that's Gunsmoke. Now there were Gunsmokes where he would mount up with Chester and they'd ride off to hunt down the bank robbers, or ride off to hunt down a missing person or something, or ride off to check a homestead that's 10 miles out of town that you know, has got a problem. So minor travel, but again, that idea that you're riding away from civilization, and the minute you get away from civilization on a horse with a canteen, with potential threats, the weather, Mother Nature, Native Americans, or bandits, or whatever it is, banditos, whatever your location, these things all become dangerous to your survival and to your existence, and makes the travel itself a game in and of itself to me. So this is June 5th, inspirational films for me, but I'm going to tie it to a mechanic. This film tied to the mechanic of travel, whether you hex crawl, whether you point crawl, whether you tell a tale, whether it is a little mix of both with a little Wandering Monster rolls as you just pass time and days, etc., which is normally how I do it, and it's kind of how I do Simbaroom, a little interlude with a little intermixture of checking something or asking the players to investigate something you've seen, or etc. That's ideal. I'll be running Simbaroom tomorrow night, my next session, picking up the mantle from where Dale left off. Malleus recovering from his illness, so we're going to try to get Malleus on his feet. And you can bet there will be travel, and you can bet there will be a kind of a mix between interlude and mechanics. I won't hex crawl in Simbaroom again, probably, right? I think Todd in our Joth campaigns, Chronicles of Joth, Blackfish Bay, Overland Travel, Todd does a perfect job of meshing that little bit of narrative travel with the mechanical pieces. And it's okay if we know he's rolling for something, and it's okay if we know he's rolling for the campsite checks. It doesn't distract from my immersion at all. And of course, telling the tale of what we see as we move along through the trees and down the road and what we hear in the distance, etc. It's perfect. And I can't imagine any session where we're not traveling. Scott, when he ran Savage Worlds for it, we traveled on the river, right? And then we got onto land, and then we traveled through the jungle. Very simple, but we were moving. We were moving from point A to point B. And although the game wasn't about doing nothing but travel, we still went from river to shore, from shore inland. And that mattered to me. I could see us hiking through the jungle. I could see us on that river dodging machine gun bullets as the patrol boats rolled up on us. And the game isn't about travel, but travel is part of storytelling. Travel in film, travel in television, travel in literature. It's part of that narrative. It's part of the sequence, the chronological sequence of time, right? If not, think about the film Dunkirk, which is told totally out of chronological order. It's told in matter of fact, it's multiple circular out of chronological order. Dunkirk is a masterpiece of filmmaking that is not chronological. And why did they do it that way? Because we all know the story of Dunkirk, right? All the British, boat owners went across the channel to rescue the British Expeditionary Force by the thousands. They were bringing those men off in fishing boats and trawlers and warships, and trying to get 300,000 British troops off, out of harm's way, And but we all know that story. And if they told it linearly, it would be really kind of okay, like a documentary. The fact that that was non-linear in multiple places made that film very interesting view of how things were going down during the Dunkirk. I won't say disaster; it was really heroic ultimately. So anyway, there's a great again, and I don't say anachronistic, non-chronological. So travel very often marks our time. It's chronological, but when we do it non-chronologically, and in gaming, it's very difficult to do that. Jumping players in headspace at different times and places around in one session would be very, very convoluted and very difficult to do. I'm not saying you couldn't do it as a test, you couldn't do it as an experience, starting but bouncing it around and it being non-chronological certainly affects in actual live play the sense that you must keep players alive, because if they died in a non-chronological scene, and then we're going to go back in time to when they got on the ship with Alien and start playing there after we've already played the future, right? Well, we know if somebody dies here, they can't be at the beginning here, right? Or vice versa, right? So, or if they die on the way to there, they couldn't be in that piece later. So it's it's not a great actual role-playing, non-chronological play, unless they're chronicles where we jump around epic periods of time to tell the tale of certain heroes that are still with us, so to speak, into the future, into the past, 6 months ahead, 3 years ahead. Let's go back 6 months to when you guys, before you went into the City of Thieves. Obviously, if one of them died in that session, then it would erase everything they did afterwards, which is why even chronicles, generally you want them in a linear fashion. So we don't go back to tell the tale before and Joe dies. Well, how did Joe end up in these other sessions we've already played? So non-chronological is not an option. Therefore, travel is normal because it also tracks the chronological telling of time, so to speak, marks time for us in many ways. It marks danger. It marks removal from civilization. It marks mystery at every turn. And it gives us plenty of opportunities for variables to arise in the play to find out scenario. Okay, thanks for watching. That was The Way Back is the film, a big inspiration to me. I think it was 2012 is when that film came out, if I remember right. It might be a little later, 2016, I can't remember. True story about prisoners that escaped a gulag in Russia, and I think hiked 5,000 miles. At least one of them made a 5,000-mile trek, if I remember right. Maybe it was 2,500 miles. I can't remember. Point is, remarkable.